looked like the most mild, pleasant-looking grandmother you will ever meet. But I wouldn't sit down and have a drink with her. Hey there, lovelies. I'm Crafty Dragon, and you are watching Crafty Dragon Explores Dark Reality. For those who have been here for the last couple of episodes, yes, I have had a bit of an upgrade. No, it's not called an upgrade. What the fuck is it called? Rebrand. Get there in the end. I've had a bit of a rebrand. Crafty Uncovers wasn't feeling right, so we are going with Crafty Dragon Explores Dark Reality, or CDE Dark Reality, because I'm going to be talking about true crimes and mysteries and urban legends and cryptids and all of the dark, twisted shit that goes on in the world. If that's your kind of thing, please drop me a subscribe. Maybe click the little bell for me, just so you don't miss when the next video comes out. Today I'm talking about a woman called Dorothy Puente. On the 9th of January 1929, Dorothea Helen Gray was born to Jesse James Gray and Trudy May Gray, two raging alcoholics. Firstly, we got Jesse James, her dad. He had fought in World War I and had been a victim of a mustard gas attack, which then, let's be blunt, fucked up his life for the rest once he got back from the war. While Dorothea was growing up, her father would constantly threaten to take his own life, usually with a gun, although there was one time where he threatened to jump from a water tower. Sure, that did her psyche the world of good as she was growing up. And then we had her mother, Trudy May Gray, who liked to hang out with tough groups like biker bars, and she would hang around with these gangs, and she was working as a prostitute, and she would disappear for nights on end and then just come home as if nothing had actually changed. Dorothea did claim once that she and her sister were put in a cupboard under the stairs while mother went away for a few days, and that's where they stayed because they were told not to leave until she came back. Wonderful parents. They argued, they were abusive to each other, and the abuse went down to their children as well. Dorothea's father passed away when she was about 14. Dorothea had been helping to look after him, but the after effects of the mustard gas attack took a toll on his body. And then within 2 years, so before she was 16, her mother passed away. Ironically, her mother died in a motorbike accident while she was hanging around with the biker gangs that she liked to hang around with. So then Dorothea kind of bounced between houses. She lived with her older siblings, she lived in foster homes. But at the age of 16, she decided to go it alone, and she moved to Olympia, Washington. So while she was in Olympia, she worked in an ice cream factory. But I don't know if it didn't pay well enough or if she just wanted to be like mum, but she also found herself working as a prostitute. After a little while, she met a man and she got married for the first time. Now, I'm only going to name her final husband because he's relevant. The rest of them, not so much, but you'll understand as we go on. So she got married in 1946 and she had 2 babies. Turns out she fucking hated being a mum. So without the husband's knowledge, she gave up her children to the state and then disappeared for a month to LA. As you can imagine, this was all too much for her husband, and he filed for divorce. Seems like a pretty normal reaction, What was weird, though, is that Dorothea told people that her husband had died. She didn't tell people she was divorced. Now, I don't know if that was a coping mechanism. It was easier for her to think that he was dead. Now that she was alone, and I don't know how she got here, but she decided to try forging checks for money. And the first time that she tried to do this in a shop, she was really, really nervous, and she kind of gave herself away. So she was soon caught and arrested. But But what it meant for her by being arrested was that she was actually, like, psychologically examined for the first time. And the psychiatric exam actually showed that she was compelled to steal due to a strong desire to live a better life. And because she was a young girl with no one to show her any better, that's why she did what she did. So they were quite lenient on her, and she got 1 year imprisonment, and she was let out within 6 months, I think it was. Being inside didn't deter her from this lifestyle, shall we say. 6 months later, after coming out on probation, she decided that the police wouldn't be too bothered if she disappeared, because her crime wasn't hurtful to anybody else. So she left where she was, and she was actually right. The police weren't that bothered that she'd gone. They didn't really look for her. So she went about her life. Now she was no longer scared of criminal activities, and now she even had friends to help her avoid the law. In 1952, she married her second husband, and she was actually with him for 14 years, so he should be significant. But he's not, because the main bulk of her story happened years later. So we've got 14-year-long marriage. It was filled with lies. It was filled with abuse. It was a time where her compulsive lying became quite noticeable. At first, her husband was, like, enthralled by her, but it soon became tiresome. Some of the things that she told people was that she was a Muslim and that her parents were Egyptian and Israeli. I don't know why. She told somebody that she was a rockette, but she had to leave due to injury. She even told people that once she had worked with Rita Hayworth. Of course, because, everybody's done that, right? The domestic life didn't really suit Dorothea. She drank heavily, like her mother, and while her husband was away, because he worked away from home for solid chunks of time, and while he was away, he was getting phone calls from the neighbours complaining of other men coming to her house at night because she was still working as a prostitute. I think she enjoyed the attention, I'm not gonna lie. She was gambling, she had a shopping addiction, and she was, I guess, making money to feed these addictions. But by the late 1950s, she changed the way that she wanted to make money. She was aging, she was finding it harder to attract men because she was no longer this youthful woman. So on one of her visits to Sacramento, she started a bookkeeping service. It was a cover for her being like a madam of a few brothels. This kept her sustained for quite a while, but by 1960, the owner of the building was becoming suspicious as to what the building was being used for. So he called the police, and an undercover operation was orchestrated to catch the business in action. So undercover cops were sent in, and they were able to catch Dorothea and another woman in the act of being a madam and being a prostitute. They also found a date book in the back office that Dorothea had kept up with, like dates that people have visited, prices, basically all the evidence they needed to prove that this was a brothel. In court, she tried to deny knowing it was a brothel. Of course, that didn't work. Both women were charged with prostitution, and Dorothea was charged with pimping. But this woman with her, I don't know if she's sucking penis or if whatever she's doing, but she was doing something because she worked out a plea deal for a lesser sentence, and she spent 90 days in jail. 90 days. So she then returned home, after being missing for a while, and funny enough, the marriage then declined even further. You got to hand it to them. Somehow they managed a few more years, but they divorced in 1966. And then she married again, like real soon afterwards. I don't know if she don't like being alone. I thought she'd be happy, you know. But this time she married a man who was completely different to her first two husbands. He was 19 years younger than her. He didn't make much money. He worked as a handyman. So Dorothea became like the head of the household for a change. And I think that suited her better. She opened a private halfway home that provided an alternative to sleeping on the streets for homeless people, with particular interest in people who were suffering from drug abuse problems and alcohol abuse problems. It was unlicensed, so she had to slightly keep herself under the radar. She didn't really have the qualifications to do it, but she made good money, she got a good reputation. It was called the Samaritans, and it went really, really well. Shortly after she had began the Samaritans, one of her residents was giving her husband a lift to the pubs, but he was not happy with the way that her husband was disrespecting Dorothea. He had wandering hands, wandering eye, was a bit of a man whore, to put it nicely. And one night, when they returned back to the property, this resident decided to tell Dorothea's husband what he thought. This started an argument, and very quickly Dorothea became involved. And she came in and she punched her husband in the face. Now, I'm not laughing because she punched her husband. I'm just laughing because it's awkward, man. This care home was not all that it seems. There was a special ranking system to the way that she housed her tenants. And this was not known to the outside world at all. She had private rooms in the house that were only given up to those that would relinquish their full monthly benefits to her. They gave her full financial control. To everyone else, including those who got less from the government, they were all kept in the basement. There were tiny cubicles. They had like curtains around them, you know, like as in hospitals, but not that nice. We're talking like really dirty, like shower curtain-y type material around a bed, and there was one toilet, like I think it was in the middle, and that was shared by everybody who was down there. To the outside world, she looked like a saviour. She was helping people from the Latino community. She was giving away cheap vitamin shots. She went under the radar for a really long time. She was committing fraud by signing social security checks as the people who were living in her home, and pretending that she had all the credentials that she needed to look after these people. The whole thing was just a giant illegal act. But the first signs that something was wrong was there was a long-term tenant who was called Chief, and he had been being used as Dorothea's handyman. She had given him work. She had adopted him, as she liked to tell people. And she asked him to dig holes in the basement floor, take away the soil and rubbish, and then cover the floor in concrete. She also had him knock down an old garage and have that replaced with a concrete slab too. So all that was done, and then Chief disappeared. And I don't think Chief's ever been found, as far as I could tell. She did marry again in 1976. This time the marriage lasted barely more than a week. By this point she had already become Dorothea Puente, I can't remember the second surname, but she had another Latino surname to go with it, and it kind of feels like she was just getting married to keep the surnames. She would be able to appeal better to the Latino community if she had a Latino surname. But the charade could not last forever. In 1977, one of her former residents, a man called Robert Davis, was in jail, and he was awaiting his social security check. When he looked into it a bit further, he found that it had already been signed, but he had no recollection of signing it. So he started to think, and then he remembered that his past landlady had kept her tenants away from their post. So he added it all up, and then he told the police. Turns out there were 34 other checks that she had forged. She tried to lie her way out of it, but was not believed. When she realised she couldn't get away with it, she pleaded guilty to all of the charges in order to get a lesser sentence, which, I'll be honest, I think most people would do. She ended up 5 years, and then she got probation. While she was on probation, she tried to commit the same crime. Basically, she ruined herself. She ruined her reputation. She ended up leaving town. Once she was out of prison, she was visiting bars, searching for older men who she could try to rob. And then in 1981, she came back to Sacramento and began renting an upstairs apartment on the same road that she had previously lived. In 1982, 74-year-old Malcolm Mackenzie accused Puente of drugging him and then robbing him. They had met at a club called the Zebra Club, or the Zebra Club, and he had been surprised by her. She'd walked over, she'd been really confident, she'd introduced herself, they'd had some drinks, and then they'd gone back to his place. But once they were back at his house, Mackenzie had felt that his limbs were going numb. So he'd laid down on the sofa and had become paralysed. So he literally just laid there and watched her rob his house. She walked around, she helped herself, she found stuff to take, and then she fucked off. So about an hour after she'd left, the drugs had worn off, he was able to move, and then he called the police. The police then discovered that there were 5 other robberies just like this one. But again, I don't know if she dropped to her knees or what she was doing, but she convinced the judge that she was neither a threat or violent, and she walked free 4 days later. So, in 1982, so the year after, Dorothy started up a friendship with a woman called Ruth Munroe. They had talked about becoming business partners? No? They had talked about becoming business partners in a new venture. In April of that year, Ruth moved in with Dorothea because her husband had to go to a veterans hospital. She moved in so that she had company and that she wasn't alone at that time. But within 2 weeks of moving in with Dorothea, she started to look sick, exhausted, overwhelmed. Her children noticed that she always had a drink. It was specifically a creme de menthe of all things. It was always in her hand when they visited, although her mum was not a big drinker. And friends of hers noticed that she always carried around large amounts of cash. She confided to a different friend that she had been blacking out, and she couldn't remember large parts of the day. And by the end of April, so on the 27th of April, 16 days after moving in with Dorothea, Ruth's daughter received a call from Dorothea telling her that her mother was really sick and that a paramedic had been called. So her daughter obviously rushed over to Dorothea's, and there were paramedics all around, lots of police, lots of ambulances, and so her daughter went straight to find Dorothea, and she was told that her mum was dead. Dorothea just told her mum was dead. She was actually dead before the paramedics even arrived. Dorothea first blamed Ruth's heart, and she also tried to imply that Ruth might have taken her own life because there were a bottle of tranquilizers on her nightstand. However, there was an autopsy where they found that Ruth's liver was bloated. It was clear from the first incision that she suffered from alcoholism, but if you spoke with her children, she hardly drank. So in those 16 days, she had done so much damage to her liver. Her stomach was also found to be empty apart from green liquid, which would have been the creme de menthe. So she must have been starving when she died. Further testing revealed that the cause of death had not been heart-related at all. Ruth died because there was too much tranquilizer in her blood, but there was also massive amounts of Tylenol and codeine. Now, she'd only been described Milltown, so they listed her death as undetermined. Ruth's children believed Dorothea had something to do with it, but there was no evidence to push this further at that time. Dorothea wasted no time at all to find her next victim. In May, so days later, she convinced an ex-patient of hers who was called Dorothy Osborne to come and stay with her. As soon as she arrived, she was given a drink, and I would put money on it if that drink was creme de menthe. And at some point, Dorothy passed out. When she woke up, she was alone. Dorothea wasn't in the house, and she noticed a large amount of money had been taken from her. So she was suspicious of the drink. It tasted really bitter. She's now missing money. So she went into the kitchen and so clever, put a few drops of what was left in her glass in an empty capsule. But there was also white powder on the kitchen surface, so she took a sample of that as well, and she took it to the police. Police acted very quickly, and they managed to catch Dorothea before she jumped on a plane. She was fucking off to Mexico. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison. While she was in prison, she started a pen pal relationship with a man called Everson Gillmouth. They started off as friends, and then over a couple of years, it became more of a romantic connection. And they agreed that on her release day, Everson would be at the prison to pick her up. So when she was released, he did just that. He turned up in his bright red Ford pickup truck, and off they went. Dorothea still had her house on F Street, and by this point the owners of the house had actually moved on. But they instead of just renting her the upstairs room, they rented her the entire house. Her and Everson moved in quickly. They opened a joint account. They got married very quickly. It all happened really, really quickly. After moving in, Everson kind of disappeared, and she told people that he'd gone back to LA for work. She hired a local handyman to put up some wood paneling in her apartment, and asked him to build a box. Now, this box was 6 foot by 3 foot by 2 foot, and it was apparently for books and other items. And she offered the handyman a red Ford pickup truck for $800 as payment. She asked him to come back to help her take the box to a storage unit, and when he returned, it was nailed shut. She told him it was full of books and rubbish, and that she was going to take it to the storage depot. When they were in the pickup on the way, she made him pull over, and she dumped the box on the riverside. It was at an unofficial dumping site, so I'm guessing just where everybody else dumped their shit. So she dumped it there. On New Year's Day in 1986, a group of men came across this box, and they decided to open it. And inside, they found, to their horror, a decaying corpse. He was contorted into the fetal position and completely unidentifiable. But because he wasn't local, no one in the area came forward to claim him. So Everson Gillmouth just wasted away in the morgue, his name now only listed as John Doe, while Dorothea continued to claim his pension. Because of course she did. Once again, she established a room and board business. She had the run of a whole house. Why would she not? She ended up with 40 new tenants, most of whom, again, were drunks or drug addicts. And she went straight back to what she was doing before she went to prison. She was collecting tenants' mail. She was forging signatures on checks. She was committing fraud left, right and centre. Now fast forward a couple of years to November the 11th, 1988. She received a visit from the police who were looking for a missing resident called Alvaro Montoya. He was a developmentally disabled schizophrenic, and he had been reported missing by his social worker. So the police came to interview her. There was nothing to report. They went away. They came back a couple of days later, and on this visit, one of the police officers noticed that there was disturbed soil on the property. So they decided to dig. They decided to dig in the garden, convinced that they were going to find Alvaro Montoya. What they weren't expecting was to find the body of a woman called Leona Carpenter, a completely different tenant. So they started digging the whole garden. Eventually they discovered 7 bodies in that garden. Puente was not initially a suspect. So she was allowed to leave the property, and I am laughing at this because this is stupid. She was allowed to leave the property because she said she wanted to meet with her nephew at the local coffee shop. And what makes it worse is one of the police officers walked her through the crowd that had gathered while the digging was happening. By the time she was suspected, obviously, she was gone. She had fled the coffee shop. Luckily, 3 days later, the police received a phone call from a pensioner in LA. It turns out that Puente had been talking to him in a bar and they had arranged to see each other again. But he had had a bad feeling. Luckily for him. And when he got back to his room, he turned on the TV, he saw her face, and then he contacted the authorities. The 7 bodies that they discovered took a while for the police to identify. And they had a hotline open for people to report missing relatives, missing friends. And they believe that there may have been up to 25 former tenants who were missing. The 7 bodies in the garden and Ruth Munroe and Everson were the only 9 people ever found. So the 3 days that Dorothea was on the run, Ruth Munroe's children had been able to reopen her case, and Everson was also identified due to the way his body had been wrapped. So both of the murders were tied to Dorothea. However, I don't know how, but out of the 9 murders, she was only convicted of 3. I don't know if that's because 3 was enough to keep her in prison for the rest of her life, or if there wasn't enough evidence for the other 6, I'm not sure. But she died on March the 27th, 2011, taking her secrets with her. So that was the story of Dorothea Puente. Thank you so much for sticking around and listening. If you enjoyed the video and you haven't done so already, please make sure you hit that subscribe button and make sure you hit the bell so that you're notified next time a video is published. Until next time, guys, take care of yourselves. See you later.